Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Nazarik was in high school DxD? Russian Reversal wrote this amazing story. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Mamanga examined Rainier closely, but she never woke up from her strange Zen trance, continuing to lie still on the ground with a slight and mysterious smile. Mamanga even used Awaken on the girl, but the low-level spell didn't work, so apparently Rainier wasn't asleep either. But if that were so, then her current situation was even stranger than Mamanga had assumed. Rainier didn't wake up during the cutting of the red dragon, which was over in a few minutes. Nor did she wake up during the transfer of its parts, which added to Nazarik's collection, nor even when Mamanga, as a test, ordered Aura to get rid of Rainier herself. When Rainier did not rise even when she was about to die, Mamanga was able to determine that whatever the fallen angel's condition is, she was clearly now completely useless in terms of answers. Except maybe using control amnesia, where he could see the answers to his questions straight from Rainier's mind. But, as the brief experiment with Issei had shown, the mana consumption was considerable, and it would take a long time and many attempts to accrue an acceptable amount of information. And so, relying on the fact that Rainier had no unique escape powers of any kind, Mamanga ordered her imprisonment in the frozen prison. That done with, he returned to pondering the current situation he had found himself in. Seeing off Rainier, who had never woken up, being carried away with some strange hesitation by Cocytus vassals who, as if they were in doubt as to how exactly they should treat Rainier. Although Mamanga had zero knowledge of the body language, gestures, and seemingly unchanging faces of the insectoids, and therefore did not give it any weight. For all he knows, that's their default expression. Rainier can be dealt with a little later. At the very least, she can be killed and resurrected again to unequivocally rid her of all the statuses affecting her. Mamanga pondered the solution as if to turn on and off a living being was just something normal, the old reliable technique, before shaking his head. Judging by Nigrito's assessment, she should be able to withstand even the lowest level resurrection, and experimenting with resurrection should have happened sooner or later. However, if she refuses to resurrect, I have no decent ways to resurrect her forcibly, only some high-level magic and wish upon a star can do that. And the latter is too valuable, since I can only apply it 6 times without spending EXP, after which I have to spend my own experience to activate it. An unfortunate situation indeed, so it's worth checking first to see if she wakes up on her own, after which I can send Pestonia to help Rainier recover. And only after that failed, can I experiment with resurrection. Mamanga shook his head once more before returning his gaze to the spot where the red dragon fire had finally gone out. It burned long enough, but in the end it still went out even without using the special abilities of the inhabitants of Nazarik, though it did scorch the walls black completely. However, the bare walls of one of the random rooms on the first floor were practically worthless. And the daily limits on restoration had covered rebuilding the room, hallway, and a couple of corridors damaged when the red dragon suddenly appeared in front of Mamanga easily. Almost so the world-class item is lost. Mamanga's emotions surged for a moment, along with his anger at the dragon that destroyed the world-class item, then at the Goman that appeared to have somehow participated in it. Then at himself for making such a mistake before dissipating completely. Okay, no point in crying over spilled milk. In a pinch I can always console myself with the thought that I deprived a potential enemy of a world-class item. I wish I'd gotten it, but at least I got some important information in return. First and foremost, the very information that in this world at least some world-class items are not just artifacts, but contain other sealed beings with strange and powerful abilities inside them. Mamanga imagined for a moment himself sealed in the staff of Ain's old gown, giving the user the ability to use goal of all life is death, but dispelled the thought. In that case I need to be careful. Perhaps the world-class items of this world, sacred gear, operate on entirely different principles than those of Yggdrasil. When the dragon was released from the inventory of Issei, he appeared intelligent, but far more critical to note was that the Throne of Kings did not suppress the effects of his strange ability, Boost. If the Throne of Kings has lost its function of neutralizing the actions of enemy world-class items within Nazarik, this is extremely disturbing news, for it suggests that the actions of the world-class items have changed. Mamanga rubbed his belly where his own world-class item was stored in some doubt. Or is it that this world-class item was not directly directed against Nazarik? After all, the ability used, Boost, only affected the dragon itself, the function of the WCI enhancing the dragon rather than targeting Nazarik directly. Or is it because the WCI of this world, the sacred gears, is a living being, whereas in Yggdrasil they were merely artifacts? Or could it be that once it left the bounds of the inventory and, I assume, the gauntlet, the red dragon ceased to be a world-class item? And that it became just a high-level creature with the unique abilities for which it was originally imprisoned in an artifact for? And the Throne of Kings has no effect on creature abilities? I have so many theories and I should check them out. But at the same time, I wouldn't want another world-class item bearer anywhere near Nazarik. Throne of Kings has now changed its effect, or world-class items no longer offer their bearers protection from other world-class items. It might cost me dearly. I feel exhausted just imagining the consequences. After these reflections, Momonga shifted his gaze, finding Hanzo and Gomen still silently awaiting orders, in the DxD pose with their heads down. As if they imagined themselves as samurais, waiting for the moment when their lord would allow them to seppuku and retire from life with what remains of their honor. Why are you still here? Momonga turned to the two ninjas, then inwardly cringed a little as the two creatures flinched, just realizing how harsh his words might be taken. I mean, Omo, I wanted to say that you have done your tasks well and can go to rest for a while. Both creatures twitched after these words, then nodded slowly. Of course, my lord, we will always be ready to answer your call. Yes, they've just encountered, albeit briefly, a 100-level dragon. I might be used to that thanks to my experience from Yggdrasil, but the both of them only having existed for, how old? Half an hour old? They must have been terrified of something like that. That must be why they're trembling so much. They showed their best side by rushing to defend me from the red dragon, even though they know they were nothing more than an annoying gnat to him. Momonga shook his head slightly. Of course, they're much lesser in importance when compared to Nazarik's NPCs, but they're really loyal to me and performed well right after their summoning. I'll have to figure out how to reward them. Come to think of it, maybe I should reward all of Nazarik's NPCs? They are loyal to me, but their loyalty may change over time. And even if not, I will never forgive myself if I become to Nazarik's NPCs what my old bosses were to me. No, even more than that, they are not just NPCs now, they are now living beings. Human and non-human beings with their own goals, thoughts and aspirations, not just mindless drones for battle. I will need to devote time to studying them and trying to develop some sort of reward system. My head starts to hurt just thinking about it. Besides, I still need to figure out exactly what to tell Rainier when she wakes up. Momonga shook his head once again, trying to jostle his gray matter. I haven't directly confirmed what she said about me being her god or father, but apparently indirectly confirmed it to Aura by answering her question. She seemed to easily take for granted that I was some sort of god. Especially when Rainier said that she was created. In the minds of the NPCs, she was created in the same way as they are. And based on the loyalty I have managed to see from the NPCs, it is extremely easy for them to imagine me as some kind of god. If I tell the NPCs now that I just lied to Rainier, then I'll have to answer Aura's question about Bukubokugama. Not to mention the fact that posing as a god will obviously make it easier for me to influence Rainier. Momonga sighed, feeling the convoluted web of lies he has to manage trying to strangle him. But if I accept that Rainier and, I assume, the other fallen angels at least, or anyone else, are my NPCs from the past, there will be a problem with how I should treat them. I just can't consider Rainier on the level of my own NPCs. But if I start treating them significantly worse, the NPCs will notice this. They'll have a question like, if Momonga treats his past NPCs so badly, then he'll treat his current NPCs, us, badly in the future too. It'll break their heart. Or maybe they'll revolt and then I'll be destroyed. I have a lot of trump cards up my sleeve and full information on all Nazarik NPCs, but the most I can fight under such conditions is 200th level NPCs. And that's if I burn through every expendable item I have. If all Nazarik turns against me, there is almost nothing to save me. Most likely I can't even hope to escape from Nazarik. Especially considering that I don't want to fight Nazarik, the last memory of Ain's old gown. Momonga took a slow breath, then held his breath and exhaled. Okay, Momonga, no need to panic, we'll deal with problems as they come. Rainier appears to be still out cold, and I've ordered the NPC to let me know when she wakes up, so she's not my concern right now. The one issue I need to tackle right now is something else entirely. Momonga shifted his gaze to the bloody pool of blood in which no human figure could be discerned, crushed first by the red dragon's paw and then burned to black charcoal by its flames. What to do with Issei Hayudu? Scratching his head, Momonga was struck by the conundrum he's in. Initially, I did plan to let him go home, albeit by taking his sacred gear and changing his memory. I will not, however, sacrifice rare, scarce items to resurrect him, especially given the danger that the red dragon in his inventory might resurrect along with his resurrection. Who knows what the dragon's reaction to that will be? Mamanga shook his head. From what he told me before he died, his parents won't really notice he's missing until 24 hours later, and they're not powerful. They can't make my life much more difficult in the future, especially if I do go back now and kill them. However, if the disappearance of one person can still be justified somehow, the disappearance of an entire family would be difficult to explain. It might attract the powerful figures in the world's attention. Not to mention that in this case I would not just have to show up for a moment, but to search around the city a bit and possibly leave some traces. Mamanga frowned slightly, coming with another avenue of actions. If I completely ignore Issei's parents? From what he says, magic is not available to his family, or his parents have managed to hide its existence from their son all this time, but more likely still the former. While teleporting into this place would require at least a 9th tier of magic, gate, protection from the multiple debuffs of this place is also necessary. Furthermore, an encounter with Nazarik itself, a small island in a seeming infinity of nothingness, seems minimal at best, especially if I keep the scrying defenses up. In other words, the possibility that a threat could come from them is minimal. Satisfied with his conclusion, Mamanga nodded. In that case, it's probably easiest to just leave them alone. Mamanga frowned slightly as another niggling though drilled into his mind. But I wouldn't want to upset these people. How strange, I don't feel anything about Issei's death, but for some reason I am saddened by his parents' possible reaction, just because I can draw a parallel with myself. Really, what a farce. Mamanga tensed for a moment, trying to reconcile his rational part with his emotional part, or, in other words, trying to find a suitable justification for his feelings. Okay. To begin with, I need information, and while Rainier is a good source of potential information, she is still unconscious or whatever else happened to her. Also, now that her status is at the level of potential fellow NPCs for the denizen of Nazarik, any harsh actions towards her, like using charm magic, the NPCs will try on themselves. Which means I can't vouch for the truthfulness of the information she can give me, since I can't just torture her. Not to mention the fact that her information may only concern her side, she may lie out of ignorance, or might have biases that I can't detect if I just have one source of information. The need to verify the information she will give me from other sources, the fact that being a weak creature she may simply not know much. And of course the fact that Rainier may overlook some details she would consider obvious, if she really perceived me as her god. Mamanga felt some phantom shiver down his back when he imagined the rest of the NPCs calling him God. Besides, I just don't want to sit twiddling my thumbs in Nazarik. Even if it's my home, it's basically just a box floating in the void. I'd be glad to have some chance to get out of it. Especially if I can find a place without red dragons jumping out of the void every few minutes. Mamanga grimaced like he's feeling a toothache. What is wrong with these dragons anyway? Why am I always bumping into them? I hope I don't get more dragons in my way. Mamanga thought of an idea that suddenly struck him for a moment. In principle, after getting rid of Issei and having the abilities of his new spell, Create Body, he could just copy Issei's body and impersonate him. Besides, he really wouldn't mind going back to school. More specifically, the chance to attend high school was a rare chance. He had only managed to learn elementary school in his life, so raising his level of education would be nice. However, his memories of Issei made him instantly drop the plan of using Issei as his cover. Mamanga considered himself to be a bad actor, so if he had to play the role of Issei, he had no doubt that he would screw up in something big and very soon at that. And let's not forget the fact that Mamanga didn't want to look like some perverted voyeur. He was totally not okay with peeping on girls and hanging out with some weird guys just to avoid arousing suspicion. But the support of his family would immediately give him extra protection and plausibility to his story. A man who appeared out of nowhere raised far more questions than a man with a family. There are so many advantages but so many disadvantages either. No, I definitely don't agree to be Issei Hayudu. Mamanga made a firm decision before hesitating, still looking at the black remains of the former human. Maybe I could send a doppelganger? Yes, a doppelganger sounds great. It could take on the appearance of Issei Hayudu to allay suspicion and still work for me at the same time, especially since doppelgangers are born actors. But at the same time, a simple doppelganger would not do. They are able to check their surroundings' thoughts, determining exactly how they should behave, but therein lies their main weakness. If two people have different perceptions of the same person at once, a doppelganger will be torn between two opposing behaviors, which in the end will spell their doom. Or so it was explained and should work. Understandably, doppelgangers in Yggdrasil functioned quite differently, given that it was all just a game. However, since this world is no longer a game, Mamanga thought and shook his head. Okay, so just any doppelganger won't do. I need someone with a high racial level to not get confused in their role, with excellent acting skills, with high intelligence. And let's not forget that there are really strong beings in this world. Momonga raised his hand, rubbing his chin a little. Negrito has confirmed that in this world, or rather, in these worlds in this universe? How do you say it right? Momonga thought for a second, then threw off the distraction. There are a multitude of creatures with an average level of 40, including many stronger creatures. And I've already encountered a boss myself and the owner of a world-class item, sacred gear. I should start switching to the vocabulary of this world if I want to try to pass myself off as a local god. Of course, it might just be that I'm that unlucky, but potentially this world is dangerous enough, and sending an untrained and weak doppelganger on a mission makes no sense. If I still want to use a doppelganger to gather information, Momonga rubbed his chin in his thoughtfulness once more. I could even use his disguise myself and even possibly influence Issei's family through him and enroll myself in the high school. My disguise would be even stronger with somebody extensively on my side already entrenched. But in that case, I would additionally need a doppelganger close enough to me and who understands how I think. So, all in all, I need a high-level doppelganger with high intelligence, strength, and also familiar with my mannerisms to be able to create a fake identity for me to insert myself into. Momonga sighed. Where could I find someone like? Momonga suddenly stopped thinking as an eerie thought ran through his mind. Fear shackled his heart. His soul quivered in the wind. All Momonga could utter was a weak denial. Oh no. Oh yes. Pandora's actor pirouetted on the spot, then instantly stopped in place and gave a martial salute with his hand to his temple. Mein Gott. Dein Wort Gestehen. Please, at least not German. The great father of the Pandora actor froze, opening his mouth before still closing it, clearly admiring the incredible coolness of Pandora actor himself. At the thought of his father admiring him so much, Pandora's actor felt some strange feeling rise from his depths, as if it would tickle lightly through all his nerve endings. The sensation made Pandora's actor hold back his laughter and swear in his heart to become even cooler so that his father could enjoy a great performance. A performance Pandora's actor would hold in his honor. Yes. Father finally managed to close his mouth before he coughed into his fist. Pandora's actor, do you understand exactly what I am asking of you? Joel. Pandora actor saluted immediately, after which he felt his father literally knock him to the ground, pinning him to the couch next to him. I also forbid you to use German during this entire mission. His father stared at him with his burning eyes staring deep into Pandora actor's very soul. That's right, I forbid you to use German at all. Period. Pandora actor only smiled inwardly at these words. This meant that his father fully acknowledged the Pandora actor's actions, that he agreed that the Pandora actor had fully mastered the coolness that came with the German language that his father had put into him. And now, Pandora actor himself had to find new ways to demonstrate his coolness, and at the same time to widen the very horizon of understanding coolness. Exactly as his father had bequeathed him. Of course, Lord Imo. The singing isn't much better, but they can be tolerated. Father swallowed something, probably an exclamation of just how cool Pandora actor's is as he pulled away from Pandora's actor, letting him first lift one leg high. Then, using that as a lever and counterbalance, to rise in a single upward motion, remembering to turn in his movement so that his cloak would rustle behind him and his back would be turned to his father. The greatest insult a resident of Nazarik could ever show to the greatest of high beings, but Pandora actor was permitted to do so, because it was Lord Momonga himself who had created him as such. Pandora's actor knew that his pose, the way he now turned his back to his maker, turning his head to the side as if looking past his father, looking at the Lord with one eye and shifting his body slightly as if he were leaning on one leg, and putting out the other to the side, was the peak essence of coolness. Oh my creator, your will be done. Cool, can you not call me that? His father swallowed yet another exclamation of coolness. You may address me as father, or pa. No, just call me father. Father? Pandora actor couldn't believe his ears for a second. Which, strictly speaking, he didn't have in this uniform and form. Was it really not a dream? Was it real? Had he really earned this most sacred right of all, this almost blasphemous right to call him, the supreme being, the Lord of all the great tomb Nazarik? Father. His own father. Pandora's actor would have cried with the force of 1,000 waterfalls if he could, but his body was deprived of that ability. Besides, the Pandora actor understood that mindless sobbing was not cool, and his father appreciated his coolness in everything. He had created him as such. which meant that the Pandora actor who had been given the greatest right of all, the right to call Lord Mamanga his father, could not, in no way, shame his lord and show his uncool side. And mere moments after his father had granted him his greatest mercy at that. Some tears were cool, Pandora's actor knew this, but with all his great intellect given to him at his father's creation he could find no way to turn those tears that were waiting to come out into cool tears. He could only smile helplessly, seeing how, with just one sentence, his father had turned all his lauded intellect to nothing, and acknowledge his utter admiration and powerlessness in the face of the greatest supreme being. Yes, but only in private, Omo, it would be strange for you to call me father on a mission. Father shook his head, before acting as if he had forgotten something. Ah, right, I almost completely forgot, in addition to your mission of gathering information and posing as Issei, I will also travel with you as your Omo, the older brother of Issei, and I'm counting on you to help me maintain my cover. Pandora's actor paused for a moment before realizing something magnificent. Indeed, there's no reward as great as the right to call him, the greatest, their father, could have been bestowed without an equally great test. For otherwise it would have been only an undeserved reward, weighing down the soul of Lord Mamanga's loyal servant, and becoming a stigma on their minds. For none of all nazarik would have allowed themselves to benefit from a reward bestowed upon them by a supreme being without an equally grand achievement. And his father, in his infinite wisdom and mercy, bestowed upon Pandora's actor just this, the opportunity to prove, not to the father himself but to himself, the right for him to enjoy the greatest reward of all. For the actor was not to take center stage in this play, being only an actor he was to become not the leading role, but the support, the main stage decoration which would elevate his father above all others. Just so, Pandora's actor was to play his part as an actor is supposed to, and let his father ascend to the applause of the audience. Playing villain and hero as his role required, to allow his father to rise above them all. Omo, however, I will likely be away a lot on nazarik business, so I will need to come up with a rationale as to why I will be away a lot. Maybe sanitary quarantine? No, I don't think they are that common in this world yet, and I don't think I could easily find slums that often use cleaners in this world. His father pretended to be thinking for a moment, as if he in his infinite wisdom hadn't found an answer to something. Immersing himself in thoughts that were beyond the comprehension of mere mortals, and plans that stretched wider and deeper than any body of water, before shaking his head. Ahem, well, that can be decided later. That's right, father. Pandora's actor instantly saluted his father's decision, causing him to freeze for a second. Also, please don't salute. Not in nazarik, not on the mission, not anywhere. Mamanga nodded seriously, and Pandora's actor was pleased that his father considered his salutes also had perfectly achieved coolness, and therefore no longer necessary. For the actor's skill was not to repeat the same old tricks, but to seek out new roles, each of which he had to turn into a peak of cool. Alright, regarding the looks you need to use, father pronounced before with a wave of his hand he enacted a miracle. Create body. A moment later, father's form changed, and a young man with brown hair and brown eyes appeared before actor. Pandora's actor felt a joyous longing in his chest, for he knew that the father was the god of death and the supreme being, but to see a new facet of his power was a blessing in itself. But to see how they would become alike indeed as son and father, was a blessing above all others, for it confirmed once again that actor was indeed entitled to call himself a son and Lord Mamanga his father. How great is his wisdom, for his every movement leads to its purpose, every gesture is woven into a single story, an endless spectacle where he owns all the roses from the sighing audience. Being both hero and villain, dragon and knight, truly, there is no happiness higher than being his son. Pandora's actor fortified his heart, for it had been bestowed upon him by his father, and began to scrutinize the form of the young lad before him. Before, a moment later, Pandora's actor form changed and the exact same copy of the young lad arose before his mirror reflection. Omo, okay, in that case, create body? I'll take advantage of that. A moment later, his lord's form changes again, now a slightly older and slightly taller than his previous one. With shorter hair running neatly down the sides of his head, clearly combed unlike Issei's hair, and eyes a tone darker, so that tracing the family resemblance was incredibly easy. Father, even so, I can only rejoice in how similar we are now, even if none of these bodies are our real ones. Pandora's actor smiled slightly, but refrained from showing his happiness fully. Wide smiles were very rarely cool, and this was clearly not the time for that. Omo, in that case, I'd also like to give this to you for safekeeping. It's the remains of your disguise's world-class item, sacred gear. It's pretty much destroyed, but I think we can still benefit from it. A moment later, Father's hand disappeared into his inventory, then emerged holding a split and shattered red gauntlet, crumpled in many places and covered in caked blood and black soot. Indeed, there was nothing unusual about the gauntlet. Even if the chief blacksmith were to repair it, it would become just another gauntlet, a relic among the thousands of others collected in the treasury of the great tomb of Nazarik. But if his lord said that it was a world-class item, then it must be one. In its current state, with caked blood and the imprint of a large claw and the slight, not yet fully gone smell and sense of the presence of the mighty red dragon sealed within, this gauntlet could indeed do good. How far does your knowledge extend, Father? How far does your eye see, and how grandiose are your schemes really? Pandora's actor took the glove in his hand gently, after which, a moment later, it disappeared into his inventory. Before, realizing exactly what role he was to play in the new play, pressed his hand to his heart, his outflow of admiration no longer could be held back. When es means Gott's will ist. Mamanga could not hold back his emotions either. I said no German. Tannen was an old dragon. Old even to dragons, not just to humans and similar short-lived races. One of the 6 dragon kings, it was expected for him to be old. At least, he was once one of them before he was reborn as a demon, and the dragon kings dwindled in number to 5. Of course, even powerful demons couldn't completely reborn Tannen into a demon, to etch out all his dragon essence and completely replace that with a demonic one. Tannen may have changed his essence, stopped being a dragon king and became a queen-piece demon. But in the end he was still a dragon, whatever the whispers of those who hated him whispered behind his back, laughing at his decision to enlist as a demon for the ephemeral purpose of saving the species. Many dragons had a rather simple view of the world, that if someone was too weak to survive, perhaps they didn't deserve to survive in the first place. But Tannen thought otherwise. Defying the beliefs of so many dragons, he caused a split in his society, forcing the ever-quarreling winged lizards to unite into groups that supported Tannen's decision to save the dragon species. With the other side, a group that were offended by his decision to serve the demons, dismissing his title of Dragon King as an old unwanted rag. And, where the seed of enmity had been planted, a harvest of lies would spring up. And so many rumors about Tannen began to spread faster than listeners had time to hear all the previous ones. That he had lost his dragon wings, that he was no longer defined by their senses as a dragon, that he now worked as a watchdog for his new master, Mephisto. Of course, lies were nothing more than that, lies. Tannen was in fact still a dragon. And dragons had many natural advantages over many other races, advantages so important that it was simply impossible to get past them. One of those advantages was a dragon's natural disposition to learn magic. Of course, Tannen was never really strong in that direction. The only magic he really relied on was the magic of his blast breath, and other than that he only relied on his strong claws. But even so, thanks to his nature and thanks to the action of his figure, Tannen has a keen sense to detect magic. He was able to sense strong magic from several hundred meters away, even while distracted by the communication with his sons. So when Tannen sensed the usage of really powerful magic as far as Tannen himself could determine, some kind of portal, he was alert. The not yet fully formed portal was enough to alert Tannen to the intrusion, only for it to disappear a moment later. Tannen instantly realized that the situation was strange. When that intrusion was instantly gone, as if knowing that Tannen had catoned on to its presence, the situation went from strange to mysterious. Teleportation wasn't some rare trick in the world of the supernatural, but it was unlikely that any of the demons in Tannen's neighborhood would suddenly dare to invade the domain of a former dragon king, an ultimate ranked demon. At least, not without an extremely good reason. And, as further questioning and inspection of the demon's situation showed, none of Tannen's acquaintances planned to pay him a surprise visit. That, in turn, made Tannen's situation even more puzzling. Who in that case would try to appear in Tannen's fiefdom? More importantly, if they were planning to do so, why did they change their mind moments later, allowing the portal to disperse before it could even fully form? Especially strange was the fact that Tannen himself and his territory were of no interest. His territory was populated almost entirely by dragons, with the only thing of interest in his mountain being the dragon apples. With all the attempts Tannen himself or the ruling Satans had made to establish relations between the other races, the process of reconciling the two different races, dragons and demons, was too slow. And that was even for Tannen himself, who was an unaging and very old man. Who could have thought of trying to go into dragon territory? Why would they change their minds? And, in the end, what did this event itself mean to Tannen himself and his dragon wards? Tannen did not know the answers to these questions. But for some reason, when he thought about the strange incident, Tannen's insides began to tighten into a strange and unpleasant knot. He hoped that it's just indigestion and not his instincts crying out that he's in great danger. Gomen and Hanzo looked at each other with uneasy looks. Though neither could see the other's eyes, they both could tell that each other's expression was nothing but good. Stepping astride to their destination, even with the pall of their failure hanging heavy on their head, they couldn't help but admire the architecture of the place they had found themselves in. The small room was filled with a light and enchanting half-light, accentuating the expensive wood counter in the room, the chandelier hanging above highlighting the many shelves full of precious drinks behind the glass cabinet. In front, laid several padded seats in front of the bar, and finally their attention landed on the steward of this bar himself. There could be nothing else this place could be, a place where failures like them go to wash away their shame. In concert, the two of them bowed fully before the proprietor of the bar, bending their waist to a right angle. "Dear Lord Clavu, we ask you to allow us too unworthy to wash away our shame in your bar with alcohol." "Oh, distinguished gentlemen," at these greetings Clavu, the bar steward, sous chef, and more importantly the myconid created by the supreme being Blue Planet, only shook his head. "My bar is always open to visitors on the days that I run it, of course, especially to such courteous gentlemen, so please take a seat." A moment later, the tentacle-like roots that made up Clavu's arms pointed to the two seats across from him. And the two, Gomen and Hanzo, made their way to those, neither of them breaking out of the general rhythm of their stride. Then, in a unified motion, they each made their way to the padded seats, each seated opposite the bar. "What would you like?" Clavu tilted his head slightly, a sign that would be difficult to interpret for those capable of discerning only the emotions of humans. A motion which the two summoned beings instantly identified as a sign of attentive listening from the myconid whose head was a mushroom. "I would prefer poison, but my lord has not granted me permission to leave on my own." Hanzo answered first. "So any drink, the most bitter and alcoholic of all, will do, for I want my body to feel as trashy as my soul." "I choose the same option." The Goman repeated the order, after which he lowered his gaze, or at least tilted his head, since it was virtually impossible to determine the direction of his gaze. I think I have just the right thing for you." Clavu reached for the first glass for the entrant. "However, such a disposition makes me ask you, gentlemen, what exactly is the sadness that brought you to me?" "We have made an unforgivable mistake," each of the two ninjas said at the same time. "And for that we have been sent to." The two ninja beings were silent for a moment, as if each was gathering his strength to utter a curse word, before Hanzo spoke first. "Rest." "Oh." The myconid's tentacles trembled as he heard one of the worst fates for the servant of Nazarik imaginable, the glass in his hands nearly falling to the floor, picked up a moment later. A tragic fate indeed. Rest was a curse word for all the inhabitants of the great tomb of Nazarik, the worst curse of all. It meant the impossibility of fulfilling one's duties, of devoting oneself to the service of the supreme beings, of showing one's love, loyalty, and admiration to the supreme beings, of fulfilling one's purpose in this world. Those sent to rest were sentenced to an ultimate punishment far surpassing death. For death meant blissful oblivion and a ghostly chance that one day their Lord would call them back into his service, granting them the right to devote themselves to his service. While rest meant that the inhabitant of Nazarik was forced to exist, devoid of purpose and meaning for their existence, watching others, blessed with sacred duties and orders, perform their duty. Truly, it was a torture above 1,000 others. The fact that any of Nazarik's servants received that horrific stigma, rest, was worthy of regret and 100 tears. Along with it, a lingering fear as to how it was that the hapless servant of 41 had earned such a horrible punishment. "That is why we wish to forget ourselves in alcohol, so that we do not have to feel this painful feeling," Hanzo replied and then bowed his head. "Lord Clavu, I beg you." Goman repeating his words were the last straw and Clavu could not refrain from nodding back. "Certainly, gentlemen, at once." Clavu turned away for a second mug, beginning to wipe that one down, but a small worm of doubt and deadly curiosity continued to grind at his mind before Clavu gave up. "However, forgive me for being rude, but I just have to wonder what brought you to such a horrible punishment." Hanzo and Goman were silent for a moment, before Hanzo answered first. "I disobeyed an order." As if in some visceral reaction of disgust, Clavu yanked his tentacles away from the ninja, causing his hands to let go of the mug in his hands, before hurriedly extending them back to catch it. "I allowed an attack on Lord Mamanga." Goman howled a moment later, and Clavu, who had reached for the falling glass, felt all strength leave his body, and instead of catching the falling utensil, he collapsed beside it. All he could hear, as if through a pall of mist, were the muffled sound of the broken mug. Clavu lay like that for a few seconds, slowly trying to come to his senses and realize what had happened, as if trying to convince himself that the words he had heard were only fantasies. Before realizing that he was still lying on the floor of the bar, next to the shards of the broken glass, and realizing that what he had heard was not a dream. From that moment, Clavu realized how serious the sins of his customers really were, and he feared for his bar and himself. Whether he would incur the wrath of Lord Mamanga and a curse on his bar if he allowed these seemingly so noble gentlemen to remain inside. Indeed, disobeying orders, such a great transgression, deserved only a punishment as great as rest. But to allow an attack on Lord Mamanga, the last and greatest lord of the supreme beings. No, such a transgression deserved not even rest, but exile. No, he could not utter that cursed word even in his mind. A moment later, Clavu's tentacles quickly opened the utensil drawer, pulling out a second mug for his visitor and no longer caring to wipe it cleaner than it already is. These people needed the strongest, crappiest alcohol that the entire great tomb of Nazarik had ever stored. And so did he. He needed urgently to clear his mind of these words and these thoughts. The third mug ended up next to the other two, after which Clavu's light tentacles headed for the very bottom of his liquor cabinet drawer. However, Clavu didn't have time to get the necessary liquor out of his supply before he heard a familiar voice. Sous-chef, gentlemen? What are you doing? Lord Demiurge. The sous-chef distracted himself from his activities for a moment, if only to respond to his regular visitor. Please, I don't believe I'm saying this, but I'm afraid this really isn't the best time for you to be here. Really? Lord Demiurge, in his usual orange jacket and small glasses on his face, only smiled good-naturedly. The very intense aura he was exuding made clear that it was all a facade. I think I heard some words that would make such egress impossible. Clavu froze, for the very utterance of such blasphemous and cursed words as, to allow an attack on Lord Mamanga, should have carried a punishment commensurate with the blasphemy of the highest caliber. And Clavu understood that his relationship with Lord Demiurge meant nothing in the face of the supreme beings and their judgment. But before I can answer you gentlemen, I just have to ask you one thing. Lord Demiurge glanced at the three men at the bar, whereupon they felt themselves pressed into place, pulled and gutted before the eyes of the seventh-floor guardian, who was in an infinite rage. His eyes, normally hidden, opened fully, revealing to the world the gaze of two diamonds with countless facets in place of his eyeballs, looking at the world with anger. Who has made himself the equal of Lord Mamanga? Lord Demiurge's voice seemed to pierce the soul of the listeners and made them freeze. Unlike last time, when Clavu fell to the ground as soon as he heard the Goman's words, this time Clavu seemed bereft of strength to even fall. His mind and soul froze in primal, powerless fear at the thought of such an act, then cursed 10,000 times the thought of standing on the same level as the supreme beings, their lord. No one, Lord Demiurge. Hanzo answered first as he was the first to come to his senses, then fell to his knees. Never. 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 Such great blasphemy, who would dare? A moment later, the Goman also fell to his knees, and after that, Clavu himself, with his hands folded in a prayerful gesture, denying any possibility of such sacrilege. After a moment, the hatred and power that the visitors felt from the floor guardian vanished, and Lord Demiurge, slightly, adjusted his glasses with a glance at the still kneeling creatures. His anger now slightly abated. In that case, I suppose I must apologize for my abrupt actions, but I must also correct your misconceptions. Moments after the pressure disappeared, the Hanzo and Goman were able to rise slowly and unsteadily, still staggering slightly from the strength demonstrated by the floor guardian. Though the weakest in direct combat of them all, he still possessed power unassailable to the other inhabitants of Nazarik, and so his action caused the three creatures to stagger backwards, still struggling to come to their senses. Was rest all Lord Mamanga said to you? Lord Demiurge smiled at the trio, but the glint behind his eye made it clear that a wrong answer was unacceptable. Clavu of course agreed, forgetting a single word from their lord was unforgivable. Or was there something else in his words and actions? Hanzo thought for a moment before he answered. He complimented us on our work. And so he did, gentlemen. Lord Demiurge smiled, as if to convey the obvious through his smile to the denizens of Nazarik. You have done your part admirably, as he would have wished you to do. Do you really think that anything you could create and do could frustrate his plans? Do you really think you could, thwart him? No, of course such a thing was impossible, Clavu instantly realized. For each of the inhabitants of the great tomb of Nazarik knew that their supreme lord, the lord of life and death, the head of the 41 supreme beings, Lord Mamanga could make no mistake. For his plans embodied countless all other plans, that they, the denizens of Nazarik, were all, in their originality, merely small pawns on his great playing board. It was impossible for any inhabitant of Nazarik, no, not one at all, to challenge the will and thwart the supreme being. I see that you are beginning to understand. Lord Demiurge smiled, then paternally patted the shoulder first of the Hanzo and then of the Goman. You thought you had made a mistake while in fact, you were only doing his will, dancing to his song, unaware that your every movement was incorporated into his great plan. And so because you did his will, he rewarded you. Lord Demiurge shook his head as if he was looking at the clumsy dance of a child. Rewarded you with rest. Of course, none of the entire great tomb of Nazarik would have allowed themselves to doubt the words of the Supreme Being. But when it came to the words of someone even as highly placed as Lord Demiurge, still infinitely closer to the rest of the inhabitants to the Supreme Being, doubt could arise in interpreting the Supreme Being's words. Especially in interpreting rest, one of the most terrible punishments to which a faithful servant of 41 could be subjected to, particularly when it was to be taken as a reward. From these words alone, doubt itself would naturally arise. But how can rest be a reward? Is it not the greatest suffering to which a loyal servant of a supreme being might be subjected to? Clavu, like the picture perfect of a supplicating believer asking their priest for absolution. Ah yes, Lord Demiurge laughed a little fatherly, and that is why it is a reward, because it is the Supreme Being who decides what is a reward and what is a punishment. It is by his command that suffering can turn into happiness, and happiness can turn into suffering, for he is the Supreme Being. Demiurge shook his head, as if once again contemplating the Supreme Being's innumerable sides and admiring each of them. Rest is not only suffering, but redemption, for he gives everyone the opportunity to become more than they already are. For rest is his cruel reward for faithful service. The opportunity to use time and one's own suffering to become even better, to become a more suitable instrument of his will, to spend time on one's perfection. For this is his beloved and cruel reward. Like a great craftsman, he allows his faithful instruments to be freed from their labors so that each of them may find their new purpose, new powers, new ways to praise him. Giving forth from their suffering the most beautiful melody that glorifies him, each move calculated, and each plan laid before his eyes. He may have already predicted that you would go to this bar in failure to understand his thought, and therefore turned reward into punishment. But, by allowing you to learn of his thoughts through my pathetic attempts to understand his words, he has once again turned painful suffering into the greatest reward. Lord Demiurge smiled indulgently in ecstasy and looked up to the emblem of Ain's old gown embroidered on the ceiling. Truly, for only he determines what is a reward or suffering, for he who is truly worthy to be called the Supreme Being. Filled with bile at himself for his disbelief at Lord Demiurge's words, Clavu could only retreat, blurring inwardly for lack of the right body parts in a self-deprecating smile. Indeed, how could he have thought that all this was not part of his great plan? Clavu felt dirty for allowing these thoughts to enter his mind and allowing the fact that Lord Mamanga's infinite love bestowed upon all of Nazarik and his infinite wisdom might have been overridden by the actions of summoned beings. Don't be sad, gentlemen. Lord Demiurge shook his head as he looked warmly on the three, as if looking at his own children. For your sadness, self-deprecation, and remorse are also only part of his great plan, which we can only comprehend a fraction of what he will reveal to us one day. Even my words are only part of his action, for he has foreseen what has been, is and will be, and your repentance will be the fire that will forge you into the instruments of his exalted will. Once again, Clavu could only smile self-deprecatingly, for to be an instrument of the will of the Supreme Being was the main and only purpose of the life of every inhabitant of the great tomb of Nazarik. And Lord Mamanga was able to grant them this, through 1,000 plans and actions anticipating the wishes and prayers of them all. Indeed, only he who is rightly worthy to be called the Supreme Being. In that case, Hanzo was the first to rise from his seat. Pardon us, Lord Clavu, Lord Demiurge, but I believe that I must begin preparations. And me too. The Goman rose from his seat, but Lord Demiurge only smiled at the duo's actions. I think that at least you will have time for one round of drinks, if you have already come to this bar. Demiurge only smiled a little deeper, as if with his mischievous smile all would be revealed. For you have understood exactly what your reward is. For understanding what your reward is, I don't think you have anywhere to be in a hurry. Lord Demiurge nodded. After all, you have been given a gift of rest. And everyone at the bar nodded at those words. Though I confess, said the Lord Demiurge, loosening the ties on his tie, while the smile on his face never changed. I confess I've been wondering exactly where his grand design is now taking place or where it's leading to. But, he nodded at the way Clavu had quickly swept up the remains of the mug he'd broken earlier. I do hope that the fallen angel Rainier will wake up soon and reveal this secret to us. Mamanga sneezed unexpectedly, then rubbed his nose a little. So the created body is so real that it is even capable of sneezing. Interesting but also rather unpleasant. Sneezing makes me momentarily distracted, blink, make a sound and leave traces in the form of droplets of saliva. If someone takes advantage of these factors and hangs some sort of dust traps around themselves, maybe I should start wearing my familiar dust and gas mask from the past world? Although, on the other hand, judging from what Negrito has managed to gather while observing this world, wearing a gas mask is not commonplace here and wearing it would make me stand out. How problematic. Perhaps I should create a human body but try to disable its ability to sneeze? I wonder if a spell can do that. Mamanga thought about the limitless experiments he could still pull off with his newfound spell, but dispelled those thoughts immediately. No, I'm just trying to find myself a distraction now. I've already decided what I need to do, and the longer I put it off, the harder it will be to admit it later. Tabula, I hope your daughter will forgive me. Mamanga made his way to the throne room where, according to the maid found along the way, Albedo was present, trying to distract himself by thinking along the way. I wonder if she considers the throne room her workplace and that is why she is there? I wonder where her private quarters are? I don't remember Tabula prescribing one to her, though I haven't read all the way through her settings, and may well have managed to forget some information in the intervening time. One of these days I'm going to have to sit down and do a thorough inventory of Nazarik. I can't even remember how many locations we've built in Nazarik. Things keep piling up and piling up. I feel bad about my plan of just running away from Nazarik to another world. Is it the human world, maybe? Is it Earth? I'll have to find out what the worlds of this place are called, so I don't get confused about naming them again. Mamanga made his way to the throne room, then froze, becoming timid, as if he was about to enter Albedo's private chambers. Which made no sense, given that he was the ruler of Nazarik and this was his throne room. Well, okay, I just need to go in, repent to Albedo for what I've done and endure her first reaction. After that, I can retire to the human world for a while and give Albedo a chance to cool off a bit. Is that what you were talking about, touch me? Mamanga suddenly remembered Touch Me's words about how he sometimes came to Yggdrasil after a fight with his wife to give them both time to cool down and blow off some steam by gutting some enemy. But Albedo is not my wife. And I don't know how she will feel about me at the end of our conversation. Mamanga thought for a moment, then took another slow breath, exhaled, gathering his strength and opened the gates to the throne room. Instantly a huge hall appeared before his eyes, huge columns with many flags hung on the sides of the passage leading to the throne of kings, and the Ains Olgown flag hanging all over the wall. A moment later, Mamanga found Albedo standing beside the throne. In fact, she instantly dropped to one knee as Mamanga appeared at the entrance to the throne room, and she bowed her head without looking at him. It pains me how much trust they place in me, especially Albedo, and I betrayed it by desecrating Tabula's creation. Mamanga shook his head, but finding the strength of will, he took a step inside, letting the gates of the throne room close behind him, moving toward Albedo. The passage leading to the throne of kings was long enough, and all the time that Mamanga walked that way, he heard no sound but his own footsteps, muffled by the expensive carpet laid on the floor. With each step and with each passing second, Mamanga felt his nervousness grow as if he were walking toward his executioner. But as he approached Albedo, finally his panic rose to such levels that his acting skill came forward as if it's expected, allowing Mamanga to act as if he were completely unconcerned about what he's about to do. Omo, raise your head and rise from your knees. Albedo, obeying his words, rose instantly, all the while casting a glowing smile and a bewitching glance at Mamanga. The joyful expression put yet another dagger into his non-existent heart, but he still steeled his resolve. I must tell you something, Albedo. He nodded resolutely inwardly, aware that he might be signing his own death warrant, but unable to turn from this road without desecrating the memory of Ains Olgown. Those feelings you have for me, they're not real. Albedo, hearing this, blinked in incomprehension, then tilted her head slightly to the side, her expression an image of confusion. My lord. Omo, Tabula Smaragdina, your creator, did not prescribe, that is, did not give you these feelings you're currently feeling for me? Mamanga nodded, feeling the weight that had been hanging there, unknowingly to Mamanga himself, slowly begin to fall from his soul. Your love for me. Omo, this is what I put in you. I saw in you something that I Something that I did not like and therefore I changed it. Forgive me. Mamanga bowed his head to Albedo a moment later, suddenly aware that he was still in the human body that he had chosen to use in the human world. I didn't even feel it. Any body I create feels like mine. I think I need to dispel this body and use my usual avatar. Otherwise it'll starts to feel like I'm unable to face my mistakes and hide behind someone else's guises, like someone else did it, not me. My lord, please raise your head. However, whatever reaction Mamanga was expecting to receive, Albedo panicking was not one of them. Please raise your head. A moment later, Albedo found herself on the floor beside Mamanga, on her knees, looking into his eyes with panic. Please? Omo. Mamanga lifted his head momentarily, an action that achieved an audible sigh of relief from Albedo. Albedo, I have changed you regarding what you were supposed to be. I apologize for that. Not at all, Lord Mamanga. Albedo instantly rose from her feet, finding herself at his side. Lord Tabula was the supreme being and my creator, but I would not trade my feelings for anything else. My lord, if my feelings don't please you, then I'll... No. Mamanga almost succumbed to a panic attack when Albedo raised her world-class item after a moment, pointing it at herself, but the panic attack was drowned out a moment later. Once again he had to thank his lucky stars that his emotion suppression still works even in his newly created bodies, otherwise he would also be panicking like Albedo. Your feelings, ahem. Your feelings don't bother me, I would even say that they please me. At these words, Albedo shuddered, as if an invisible electric shock went through her whole body. But right now you're not what Tabula made you. Mamanga knew that the NPC's creators were the most important of all for them, so Albedo couldn't help but feel something when she heard the news. Though for some reason, Mamanga saw some disgust in Albedo's expression when he mentioned Tabula's name. It must be just a trick of his new fleshy body. Doesn't that bother you? What was I like before? Albedo smiled as she asked her question and Mamanga suddenly stopped speaking, unsure of how he could put what he had read back then gently. Well, of course, naturally, the first thing she would ask in this case is exactly what she has lost. Mamanga felt some regret for his past action, but most of all vexation that he now has to say some crass words to what effectively is his niece. But, can I say that she was supposed to have been a whore? Tabula, why did your love for the gap mode generate such conflict? You were different, Mamanga finally answered vaguely, averting his gaze, asking another question to mask it. Do you think Tabula would approve of my actions? I think that my creator, Lord Tabula Smaragdina, would be pleased with my feelings with the feeling that he is seeing his daughter off to her wedding, entrusting her to one who can take care of her. Albedo only smiled at Mamanga's question. Lord Mamanga, if my feelings do not bother you, if you even are in fact pleased with them, then I don't mind. At that moment, Albedo flinched as if she'd been struck by another electric shock, but continued speaking without changing her expression. In fact, is she having a fever right now? Mamanga could see some redness in her face, and in fact her breath was getting shallower by the moment. Their conversation must be taking a great toll on her. No, of course yes. Mamanga blinked. He had been preparing for this conversation for so long and gathering his strength for so long, and in the end it was all resolved so easily. Mamanga's feelings at that moment were in equal parts relief, from Albedo not ending up trying to kill him, but also regret, from realizing just how much the NPCs trusted him and how much he's far from their expectation. I guess my worries about their betrayal really are meaningless after all. Mamanga shook his head, then looked up at Albedo, who was still staring at him intently. Mamanga resolved himself into clearing up this conundrum once and for all. Albedo, just in case you shouldn't feel bad or reluctant to tell me your true feelings, I am ready to apologize in any way I can for what I did to you. Lord Mamanga? Albedo blinked, after which a smile blossomed on her lips. In that case, I suppose I could ask you to forgive my rudeness. So she did decide to. Mamanga's further thought was interrupted the moment Albedo grasped the collar of his jacket, the style of which he had spied a little earlier from Issei's uniform. She pulled Mamanga forward, before literally thrusting her lips into his, and Mamanga's mind seemed to take leave of his body for a moment as Albedo's tongue penetrated his mouth. His emotions were cleared after a moment, but his inaction came not because of his emotions, but because his brain simply did not know what it needed to do at the moment. The pleasurable feeling from his tongue spilled over his body, concentrating in his stomach and going somewhere lower. Albedo was insistent, clearly trying to taste everything that made up Mamanga, but at the same time she did not cross some invisible line beyond which insistence would turn into aggression. Instead, while holding the initiative, she still allowed Momonga to back away at any moment. And Momonga liked that strange and unfamiliar feeling. Kissing, his first kiss was not bad at all. Momonga's experience in love affairs was, naturally, zero, so he did not know what exactly he was supposed to do rationally in the current circumstances. So he did the only thing he could, he trusted his instincts. And so when their tongues touched again, he easily overpowered Albedo, who didn't actually put up much of a fight, and answered her actions by deepening his kiss, invading Albedo's mouth. For a moment, it seemed as if the two of them were entwined in some strange dance that existed only for the two of them. The kiss continued longer and longer, and Momonga completely forgot about breathing, immersed in a strange and so pleasant feeling, as if trying to taste Albedo in her entirety. His instincts were screaming at him to take hold of Albedo's hips and continue on, the blood in his brain surging towards his loins. Luckily, before he could do anything further, his rational mind returned, and he pulled away from Albedo, taking a noisy sip of air. Not because he needed it, but as if trying to make the air replace the strange feeling still dancing all over his body. Albedo pulled away with the same sigh, wandering the walls with her eyes blanketed in a pinkish veil, before taking a sharp breath, then another and another. And with a muffled cry that turned into a groan, she collapsed on her knees, trembling. Momonga rushed over to Albedo, before he noticed a stain slowly begin to appear on her white dress, about the level of her groin, and her legs glistening in the candelabra light from the droplets left on them. Momonga froze, then swallowed the strange sweet fruity taste still reigning in his mouth and looked away. Well, I suppose now my departure can still be considered an attempt to give Albedo some time to rest a little. Momonga shifted his gaze. I'll tell Seabass or maybe Demiurge, or anyone else really about where I'm going. I need to rein myself in before I make another mistake I can't take back. I'm not ready to be a father yet. Albedo, previously trembling finely, seemed able to find the ground beneath her feet and lift her slightly lucid gaze to find Momonga's eyes. And once again emitting a muffled, obscene, long and completely indecent moan, she fell to the ground again, trembling even more than before, while the stain on her dress only grew larger. Okay, I'll tell them using message. Momonga felt a panic attack begin gathering, before it got muffled by his emotion suppression. Seeing it as the sign that he needed to leave soon, he then sighed and turned around, doing his best not to make it look like he's running away. Well, Albedo, I'm off. Gate. Momonga had a strange feeling as if he's supposed to buy some milk or cigarettes after that debacle with Albedo, especially when he's planning to leave for a long time. What a strange feeling. The NPC formerly known as Pandora's actor, now playing the role of Issei Hayadu, moved through the slowly darkening streets of the city of Kuo. He refrained from assessing his surroundings openly, to not give away his unfamiliarity with the surroundings. How unusual. Pandora's actor, no Issei, smiled inwardly. There are so many people around, so many different thoughts, and they're all meaningless, chaotic and so geistlos. Unlike lesser doppelgangers, Issei was a greater doppelganger with the maximum racial level, so his mind reading was not as bare and superficial as that of his lesser brethren. He could read not only the superficial thoughts swirling above, but even the deepest of them, pulling out important information from the depths of the minds of those around him. And at the same time, remembering to appreciate all other thoughts of no importance other than as a collectible item. The whole point, however, was that Issei was a collector of sorts, a trait he shared with his father. He shared a love of collections of all unusual kinds. Primarily related to objects of a magical nature, but anything could be a collection for Issei. Father also loved to collect living people, unusual creatures, strange materials, exotic spells, and a host of others, while Issei above all else loved to collect the rolls available to him and given to him from his surroundings. So now, finding himself in a new world, outside the great tomb of Nazarik, Issei expected to be able to collect hundreds of new rolls. And he did see them as he walked the streets, revealing with a light touch the minds and souls of those around him. But he realized with some sadness all these rolls were empty. They were practically meaningless. The people around him did not give themselves to their roles, preferring to hold those as meaningless carnival masks. They used their daily life, walking through familiar roads, following their routines, as if hoping that it was the mask that would turn them into another being, into another role, rather than their actions. Standing at the crossroads looking at his watch, the young man considered himself an exemplary worker, a faithful husband and a good teacher. But he, in fact, was empty inside, like a glass jar whose walls had been painted over, in a foolish attempt to pass off emptiness as fullness. No, there was no desire inside him to really commit to his role. As a model employee, He pondered how he could wean himself off his job early and weasel a pay raise from his boss. A faithful husband? Nothing more than a paper lantern easily pierced with one finger. Only just below his faithfulness were fantasies, desires, dark emotions. A good teacher? It was only a screen to hide his weariness and stale irritation at stupid students, and at himself, forever stuck in his position as a mere teacher. Empty, empty, empty and absolutely meaningless existence, protected solely by the easy mask and drawing of the role that they performed, but deprived of the most important thing. They lacked the spark of existence, the meaning of existence itself. They were soulless beings in their weak, imperfect bodies. Indeed, Issei knew that they were not actors, but only scenery, wandering meaninglessly around the stage, creating extras as the background in the actors' and fathers' stories. There were dozens, hundreds, of them wandering about their business and yet deprived of the sacred understanding of what their business was. Blind kittens trying to find their way through meaningless pokes at walls, unaware of what they were really deprived of. Issei even felt some pity for them. He had no particular love for humanity in him, but faced with the sight of their current condition, he could do no other than regret their senseless and hopeless walk to one day realize their true destiny. Only once in Issei's path did he encounter one man, from whom he felt something like a faint facsimile of the spark of that great flame that burned within each of the inhabitants of the great tomb of Nazarik. And, as the analysis of his mind told him, it was all down to his religious devotion to the Shinto temple at the edge of town and its gods. Issei supposed that, in a sense, it made sense. It was not a drive granted by a supreme being, whom the lower beings could not see in any other way than as God, but it was a drive all the same. Blind to their destiny, humans try to unravel the will of their gods, trying to find their destiny through the determination of their will and plan, a laughable endeavor. Even beings emboldened by the presence of the Supreme Being among them and gifted with an understanding of their purpose of existence were unable to fully grasp the majesty of the plans and the might of the will of their master. Then what chance do men deprived of this grace forever have? They were no more than blind men, trying naively to understand the will of their gods, relying solely on their own knowledge. Still, the fact that this slight shadow of a spark existed within one of them was worthy of Issei's approval and praise. His mind was incapable of even imagining how terrible it was to exist without will or understanding. And the fact that some tried to bridge this endless chasm, acquiring something whose absence they could not even fathom, was worthy of all praise. All of this, however, was only Issei's idle musings as he moved toward his home. Although he had not been handed the memory of Issei Hayadu, father had shared with him the information he had gained from his knowledge. Issei was supposed to live in Kuo. So all Issei had to do was to gradually narrow his search by reading the thoughts of old Issei's acquaintances, who began appearing periodically, and he could figure out the location of Issei's home. Something which he had just accomplished, an easy task overall. As Issei tried to get inside the heads of the two people sitting inside, and succeeding, he was intrigued by what he had found. Funny indeed, I can see why father decided to take an interest in these people. There is a spark of understanding in them, as in the priest I met earlier, but it was born not of following the gods, but of their own awareness of their place in this world. For them the reason for their existence was Issei himself and his birth. Entertaining specimens indeed, but alas, your spark of awareness is nothing before the will of my father, even if I can feel some regret for your fate. After another moment, having carefully traced the basic details in the mind of Issei's parents, Issei could only shake his head. If his father were around now, then, as if he could hear Issei's thoughts, gate, that opened near Issei, instantly revealing to the light his father who had already taken the form of Issei's big brother, just when Issei thought of it. Indeed, he already knows all the steps of this act, tens of thousands of years in advance. Issei bowed slightly at the sight of father, no, his older brother, but he allowed himself an indulgence. There was no one around them after all. He checked. Father, you are just in time. Omo, father replied, looking around as the gate closed behind him. I assume this is Issei's home. It is, father, Issei nodded, and I apologize in advance for any rudeness I may commit towards you and... Not to worry, we have a mission and we both have a part to play. Father nodded seriously. So from now on you are Issei Hayadu and I am Omo Satoru Suzuki. Father, of course, already knew exactly what plan Issei had picked up to infiltrate this family, and with one stroke of his pen, completed the necessary picture, even the family name. Aha! Did father already know everything that was stored in the minds of Issei's parents? Of course, that was exactly what it was. His father had already made his first move. Absolutely, esteemed elder brother. Issei bowed. No, just call me brother, or you can use bro or elder if you want to be formal. Father shook his head. We will continue to act like brothers in public and at any time, until we return to Nazarik, or I tell you directly and explicitly that we no longer need to support the masquerade. Do you understand me, Junior? Absolutely, bro, Issei blurted out, sporting the slightly cocky smile he'd found in the memory of Issei's parents. I'll go first and introduce you. Okay, Father nodded, then turned toward the entrance gate, moving to the side a bit, giving Issei the opportunity to advance. Issei, moving towards the strange contraption of this world, already had knowledge from his surroundings of how the doorbell was supposed to work. And as he pressed the button, hearing with his heightened ears the slight trill of a bird inside the house. A moment later, with a beep, the door leading inside the yard and then to the front doors opened, so Issei made his way inside. It still pained his heart to stop himself to turn around and hold the door for Father, devoting himself entirely to his role. Climbing quickly up the low porch, Issei opened the door leading inside the house, after which he was instantly confronted with Issei's mother and father, Goru and Miki Hayadu. They looked very irritated, fearful, and relieved at the same time, quite the mix of emotions. Young man. Miki Hayadu, a middle-aged woman, well-preserved looks for her age, with short dark brown hair gathered into a ponytail down to her shoulder blades and brown eyes. Issei notes that there's a glimmer of tears in her eyes, and that she was restraining herself from hugging him, though it looked equally likely that she was about to punch Issei as well. I am waiting for an explanation of where you were all this time, and why I could not call your phone? Goru Hayadu, a middle-aged man with short-cut brown hair, dark brown eyes, and a slight unshaven face, his big glasses prominent on his face. He was trying to look menacing, but he did not dare interrupt his wife, making it clear who was really the man in this house. Mom, I'm sorry. Issei instantly fell into a DxD, just as Issei had apparently always done in the past when his mother was angry with him. The phone fell out of my pocket into the sink. It's my fault, I'm sorry. Issei immediately began bowing enthusiastically, as if to apologize to Issei's mother, inwardly pleased that he had managed to spy many details before from the minds of random people, and inwardly apologizing to his father for calling this woman mother. Miki Hayadu, on the other hand, looked at Issei with a frown for a few more seconds, but then relaxed and looked away, dropping her shoulders and exhaling defeatedly, realizing that her anger might be misplaced. After all, it's not like her son meant for his phone to be broken, right? Okay, but the money for the new phone is going to be deducted from your birthday present. And where have you been all this time? Taking the question as his cue, Issei stood up, shook himself off a little, then acted as if he came to himself, as if he almost forgot to say something important. Mom, I found my big brother. At this moment, Father, finding the best moment for his appearance, took a step, coming out from behind the front door, showing himself off to the two adults. After which, Miki Hayadu abruptly gasped out and took a step back, along with Goru, throwing incomprehensible glances now at Issei and at Father. Omo, good afternoon, dear Father, Mother. Father bowed slowly, keeping a smile of politeness and some embarrassment on his face, perfectly playing the role of a person embarrassed by the unexpected development of events. My name is Satoru Suzuki. Miki blinked, then shifted her gaze once again to Issei and then to Father, obviously comparing their physical resemblance to each other before frowning. Of course, Miki hadn't given birth to a second son a year before Issei, which she had just happened to forget. But a look at the mind around Issei in his way home had long since shown him the appropriate way forward. Dad, my brother told me he's my half-brother, and came here from Kyoto looking for his father whom he had never seen before. A moment later, Goru's thoughts stirred, some half-forgotten memory rising to the surface, making the lie even easier, thanks to Goru himself beginning to remember his past. He said that his mother, my Suzuki, died recently, and he came to look for the father he had never met. And seeing how similar we looked, I made an assumption. Images began to form in Goru's mind, and he froze, his pupils dilating. Got him. Goru and Miki had been trying to have children for a long time, but because of Miki's medical issue, her previous pregnancies had come only after long attempts and ended in miscarriages. So, a year before Miki finally became pregnant with Issei, his father, Goru, went on a long pilgrimage to every temple he could think of, praying to the gods for help. A pilgrimage which included a visit to Kyoto, traditionally considered the seat of power of the gods of Shintoism, along being home to Japan's most famous temples. He had left his wife behind for the duration of his trip, for almost a month. Of course, Goru really loved his wife, and during the whole trip he really only visited temples and prayed incessantly to all the gods he could think of. He had even made the pilgrimage barefoot, stepping in the cold snow, almost losing his own feet from frostbite as perhaps some sacrifice to ensure that his prayers were heard. As much as his intentions were pure, in the end he still had left his wife's side for almost a month. Something which led to a small fight when his wife had discovered that Goru had some relationship with a woman in his travels. Someone named Mai Suzuki. Now, the fact of the matter is, from what Issei could gather, this Mai Suzuki was nothing more than a nurse who was secretly consulted by Goru about their medical issues of conceiving. Something that Goru told his wife about, reassuring her when she discovered the many times Goru called this Mai. However, now that living proof to the contrary had appeared before Miki and Goru's eyes, and with Mai Suzuki's death, all Goru's previous explanations meant nothing. Especially considering how similar Issei and Satoru were to each other, and both of them, according to Issei's parents' memory, were pretty much carbon copies of a young Goru. Goru? Miki, clearly coming to the same conclusion, slowly turned to her husband as her eyes glazed over, and her voice became dry and lifeless. What do you have to say about this? This. Goru took a step back out of shock as if he was struck, his back striking against the wall. This is all some mistake. A joke, a prank. Goru was indeed faithful to his wife, but the problem was that seeing the provided proof to the contrary, he couldn't produce anything that spoke in his favor except his words. Besides, that very long month alone had really made Miki doubt his fidelity for a while, and, well, Issei's perversion has to come from somewhere. Ja, what juicy stories you have. Issei smiled inwardly. And you're an interesting Ostalungstustuk to boot, Goro Hayadu? It turns out that in the past, Goro Hayadu had a desire to gather numerous beautiful girls around him for the purpose of creating a harem of concubines. While he didn't directly pass this dream on to his son Issei, he still allowed it to flourish. Of course, soon after he got married, he abandoned that dream in short order, not wanting to hurt his wife along with really loving her. At the same time, however, Miki also knew of this old dream of Goru's, and it was this knowledge that now broke free, finally overriding her perception of the figure of the faithful husband, that was Goru. How ironic, Fada, with how many empty masks of fidelity there are in the world, but the only one who truly wore none was the one whose mask became face. Issei sighed at his father's brilliance. Truly he, the father, was the greatest of playwrights, for his pen, Pandora's actor, was now writing the great tragedy of irony, weaving the disparate shards of chance into the unified fabric of a tragically comic plot. Goru. Miki raised her hand in anger, then with a sharp sweeping blow made a harsh slap that resounded in the hallway. Get out. Get out now. Goru, grasping his cheek, which had a scarred handprint on it, looked up at father, equally confused and shocked, now replaced by anger. He's lying. He's lying. I'm going to throw him out of the house. Maybe I should really go away. I don't want to cause any trouble. His father's acting was so perfect that Issei could even believe that he was really ashamed, embarrassed, and disappointed, bringing his participation in this performance to such perfection that he literally dissolved into his role, ceasing to play a character on stage, completing the deception. I did not mean to cause any nonsense. And of course, as he had planned, Miki completely bought the act and was immediately on father's side. You should stay. Where are you going to go from here? You've come from so far away. And you, Goru. Miki glared angrily at her husband, a complete 180 from his way of talking with father. Get out. I don't want to see you again. Goru, upon hearing his wife's angry remarks, still full of anger and confusion, did the only thing his lacking thought processes were good enough to do. He lunged at father, raising his fist. Issei would have had no trouble turning Goru into bloody mists with one sloppy movement of his hands. He had indeed copied an appearance that was not memorized by him at creation, not allowing Issei's original stats and skill to be added to his own, so he had to use only his own parameters. Even so, as a level 100 creature, even in his weakest, most basic form, Pandora's actor possessed enough strength to take down not only Goru, but most of the houses on this street in a single blow. And yet Issei knew that his boiling blood, which demanded action, was only another of his tests. Just as his father was always able to keep things under control, so Issei, if he wished to be his son, had to keep his feelings from interfering with his play. And of course, in no way could Goru harm his father, so this was all just another scene in a play. Goru was simply playing on strings. As one would expect, father intercepted Goru's fist a moment later with ease. Even without using Perfect Warrior, father is a 100th level player, and was therefore many times stronger than a mere human with no special abilities. However, the moment Goru's fist was intercepted with an ease that could not be expected from father's appearance, he only seemed to become more enraged, and grasped father's body with his other hand, trying to knock him to the ground. Of course, it was utterly useless. Father didn't budge even when the man put his whole weight into the action. Goru, faced with unexpected resistance, fell on the ground in a heap. Really, what exactly is father up to at this point? What advantage is he getting from letting the man embarrass himself? At other times, Issei would not have hesitated to ask father for advice or guidance. Any insult or taunt was better than the most ghostly possibility of allowing a misinterpretation of his motives and actions. But this time, Issei could not do so, for it was all a test. A test of how Issei himself could understand his creator's intent, and his ability to anticipate his plans in order to be rewarded with the right to call him father. Father himself had unambiguously pointed this out by saying to Issei that, until the moment when I tell you directly and unambiguously, that Issei had to play his part without asking any advice from father. And so, Issei now has to evaluate all the variables so that he could come to the right conclusions, to what father is planning. So what are the variables? Just after Goru was branded a cheater in Mickey's mind, now he seems aggressive, unbalanced, and at the same time, pathetic and distrustful. He was acting as if to take out his anger on his son, illegitimate or not, for daring to bring Goru's own misdeeds to light. All because the son himself sought his father, an act that only happened because of insurmountable circumstances, as his mother had died, leaving the pubescent boy without parents. Fata, tell me, are you the hero of this play or the villain? Or are you something more, and from the beginning you did not plan to hide under the mask known to these people, appearing to them in your splendor as the true supreme being? Sure enough, Goru tried to rise from the floor, unable to move father even with all his strength, this time swinging his fists again, to which father only raised his hands, pushing Goru away lightly. Omo, I apologize for what happened, but perhaps I really should leave. Issei almost laughed. With just one phrase father turned Goru into a pathetic villain, whose words no one else would believe, at the same time elevating himself with his modesty, strength and politeness to heroic heights. Turning reality into the most basic of plays, with an unambiguous hero and villain, and yet at the same time plausibly real. So much so that the actors and the audience ceased to notice the uniqueness of the script, carried away by the realism of the scene. Pandora's actor was not one to revel in human suffering, and he even, on some insignificant level, sympathized with Goro Hayadu's plight. But like an enchanted man watching the majesty of a storm approaching with all its destructive potential, devouring houses with indifferent force, Issei simply watched the play with mortal admiration. As he created his great play, using human souls and minds as canvas and words and deeds as ink. Goru, that's enough. Mickey rushed forward, trying to hold back the now hysterical Goru. But Goru no longer seemed to hear her, striving with all his strength to harm father, and yet unable even to wound him, especially now that his hands were completely restrained in father's grip. Out of impotence and anger, Goru kicked out his knee, trying to hit father in the groin. Which, as if by surprise, father let go of Goru's hands, though father himself of course suffered no damage, and it was all just a calculated move. For in his blind rage Goru swung his fist to strike again, but the knee, seemingly crashing into an impenetrable barrier in his path, failed him, causing him to stagger backwards and tip over slightly. Falling so that his clenched fist hand crashed not into father, but into Mickey, who had rushed to separate father and Goru, crashing into her face, breaking her nose and throwing her to the ground. A muffled cry of pain and surprise from Mickey finally made Goru stop. After which the anger was completely gone from his face, with blood seemingly draining from it, leaving only a funeral white wax mask, and Goru turned on the spot, rushing to see Mickey. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Goru dropped to his knees, but when he reached out his hands to his wife, the latter struck them back, refusing to be helped by the one that had hurt her. Both mentally and now physically. Go away. Mickey's voice was quiet and muffled, but her pain was unmistakable. Just go away. Goru recoiled back more than if he were actually struck, threw a hurt look at Mickey, then at Issei, who had adopted a proper shocked look, then at father. And, unable to contain himself, rushed away into the street with a sob, eager to escape as far away from this house as possible. Omo, it didn't turn out the way I wanted. Father said quietly and completely with frustration, but in a way that could be heard in the silence that settled, allowing Mickey to once again reinforce her opinion of him as a truly frustrated and noble hero. Sorry, I didn't mean for things to turn out like this. It's all my fault. No. Mickey tried to hold back the tears of pain, resentment, betrayal, and shock inside. "You shouldn't worry, it's not your fault." Each of the words was accompanied by a sob, simultaneous with the pop of bloody bubbles from Mickey's broken nose, and on the last word she finally could not help herself, sobbing at full voice. Father, seeing this, shifted his gaze to Issei, and Issei could almost have sworn it was as if Father was scolding him. His expression seemingly expressed, "What have you done?" But since that was completely impossible, Issei realized the most logical of all thoughts at the moment was that he had to help his mother. "Mother, I'm going to call an ambulance." Issei acted with alacrity as he began reading the surrounding minds for the ambulance number, but before he could, Father's voice stopped him. "No need." Father spoke out, after which he knelt down on one knee beside Mickey, making her stop for a moment in her gasping cry as she watched Father warily. Father then reached behind her back so that she couldn't see what he's doing, while Issei could see that Father was reaching for his inventory for an item, a potion of minor healing. A moment later, Issei realized that this woman's place in Father's plans was far greater than he had initially assumed. For his father clearly knew that if he used the potion now, she would later have to be taken under Nazarik's personal control or guard. Even if she were killed, she could be resurrected and subsequently interrogated for important information. And if she was not killed, she would surely soon begin asking questions of her own concerning Father's potion, not to mention just how valuable the items were from the supreme beings themselves. "Drink it." Father handed the small vial full of red liquid, and the woman, shaken by sobs and the news that had completely overturned her past conception of her life and her world, did not even resist. Mickey, powerlessly and without question, accepted the vial, drinking its contents easily, which immediately, as one would expect, healed the minor wounds that Goru's fist had inflicted on her, instantly restoring her bloodied nose and removing the blood from her face. A sure sign of rapid magical healing that restores even severed body parts, which included, for example, the blood that had left Mickey's blood vessels earlier. As soon as the healing ended and probably feeling the pain disappear, Mickey opened her eyes and, unbelieving, groped her nose. "How? What?" She looked up at Father with a confused and surprised look on her face, her earlier sadness suddenly overwritten. "Sleep." Father used a spell that instantly allowed the exhausted woman to fall asleep, with her falling in his arms, thus leaving the last memory in the woman's mind of falling asleep in Father's arms. Indeed, with each movement he only moved forward, toward the fulfillment of his purposes. Pandora's actor. "Issei, I need you to find your father, apologize to him, and make the situation at least a little better," Father sighed, playing his role even when there's no one watching. "Please, I don't think he's gone far, but I don't know, send him somewhere, preferably somewhere far away so he can't interfere anymore and no more of this. He has suffered enough already." Issei thought about Father's order for a moment. He was tempted to ask about Father's specific instructions, but he had already said before that the masquerade would continue until he said otherwise, precisely and unequivocally, which meant that this was still a test for Issei's understanding of Father's own instructions. "All right," Issei nodded, adopting his role's vernacular, and then as he rose, he quickly disappeared behind the door leading out of the house. Of course, it was easy to find Goro Hayadu with the abilities that Issei possessed. Even if he was more lacking, Goro had barely made it 1 block away, so he had instantly caught up with him. Goro was running away through unlit alleys, torn between anger, fear, and bitterness, dropping tears on the way, alternating between angry and resentful, making Issei's job much easier as he traveled through abandoned passages. At this point, however, Issei, Pandora's actor, froze. What exactly did "make the situation a little better" mean? The spark in Goru's soul has extinguished and destroyed. It could not be corrected by simple actions, unless one reversed time, or allowed the Supreme Being to act himself. Or, most blasphemously of all, went against the will of the Supreme Being, his creator himself. And though the Issei could take their guises, he was by no means equal to them. Even more, it was by possessing the ability to take their guises that actor was fully aware of the gulf between them. And now, having personally witnessed his father's great performance, he was convinced of this once more. Send him somewhere, preferably somewhere far away so he can't interfere anymore? But where exactly? Issei didn't know the place Father had spoken of, nor anywhere in this world much either. All the information he knew was made up of scraps of thoughts and memories of the people around him. Issei could confidently pronounce the name of the city, Kyoto, as he had guessed that it was far enough away, but he had absolutely no idea where that city was. And without that knowledge and having no one he knew in the city itself, Issei could not teleport Goro there. And most importantly, He's suffered enough already. What does father mean by that? It was certain that the spark this man possessed had been extinguished, and therefore he would henceforth suffer for eternity because of what had happened until he died. Eureka! Suddenly, in a single moment of realization, all of father's words came together in a single picture, and Issei could barely keep from raising his hand to his face, seeking to cover it in a fit of shame. Oh, mein Gott, how foolish I am. A moment later Issei dispelled his stealth, and appeared behind the man who had changed from running to staggering, and then he turned to him. Father. Goro paused for a moment before turning to Issei, his face changing into a relieved expression, but still with a tinge of anger and sadness. Issei. Yes, father. Issei nodded. Hurry, let's go home. We realized that this man was a trickster and mom is waiting for you. Come, she wants to apologize. Goro blinked, trying to comprehend what had been said, whereupon, a moment later, a huge weight was lifted from his soul, relief made him practically soar above the ground, and the tears in his eyes changed from angry to joyful. His expression, a smile full of joy with his purpose, his soul roaring back to life. Whereupon, Issei's fist turned Goro Hyudu into a bloody mist. Indeed, the best of deaths. Issei smiled, a creepy visage now that he's covered in blood. Truly, father is merciful. To make things right. Issei could only go so far as to violate the Supreme Being's previous orders, to tell him about the plan and bring Goro back to the family, unthinkable. Or he could simply tell what Goro wanted to hear before he killed him, send him to a place where he won't disturb us. That is, to the afterlife. To kill at the same time, make it that the last moments before his death, he felt a sense of grace. For his suffering was over, and for a moment he soared above himself, for all weight had been lifted from his soul and relief allowed him to forget everything for a moment. And in that moment, Issei killed him. Faster than his mind would have felt any pain or betrayal, allowing him to die on top of his grace, in the Father's mercy, merciful even to the one who had to die to do his will. Truly the only one worthy to be called the Supreme Being. Issei sighed as, with a masterful stroke of his pen, Father had set another point in the great play, allowing each of them to feel their part of both drama and catharsis. For a moment, Issei transformed to his original form to blow away the settling blood mist, thus destroying any possibility of Goro Hyudu's resurrection. That is, of course, if ruling out true resurrection, and stronger magic from those who knew of his existence and would have wished to use such powers for it. In a blink of an eye, Issei has returned, leaving no proof of what he had done before except for the pool of blood in the alleyway. Truly. Issei smiled, a serene, beautiful smile, totally out of place in the bloody alleyway. I am blessed to be your son, Fata. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, share and donate for more videos.